leaks. We released a report. We hired a consultant, Terracon, that assisted us this past fall to investigate concerns from the different property owners regarding basement leaks on Kansas Avenue. We engaged this consultant because there are a number of different things that went on with the Kansas Avenue project. We had a new infrastructure installed underground, new streetscape work, a lot of different activities, and of course these are a lot of the buildings in the downtown area are older buildings which have a different construction technique than some of the more modern buildings. Past couple of days we have been meeting with the property owners that have expressed to us they've had basement leaks. We've provided them with a copy of this report, and just to kind of give you guys a short summary of the findings that we had with the report is most of the leaks that the property owners have described are consistent with rain events. When they see water in their basement, it seems to be immediately during or shortly thereafter a rain event, so we don't believe the leaks are associated with, say, the new water line installation. We do have one location. We know we do have a water leak that we're addressing, but that's not something that's consistent throughout the system. And so what our consultant was able to help us do as we looked at the water leaks was say, okay, if it's rainwater, what are the likely ways that water is getting into the basements? And basically there's two kind of primary pathways we saw that water is getting into those basements. The first is basically where, say, the building face and the sidewalk edge meet. There's a joint or a seam between that building face and the sidewalk edge, and we think that could be the likely path of entry for water getting into those basements. And so the city will be making efforts over the next month to remove and improve that joint sealing along the locations where we're having leaks. The other way that rainwater or surface water could get into those basements is we have increased the number of landscaped areas along Kansas Avenue. So as water flows off the sidewalks or rains down on top of those landscape areas, they collect and absorb that water. Well, underneath those landscaped areas are all the new utility service lines, not only the city's water service lines, but gas lines and whatnot that extend over to the face of the building. So one thought is it's not coming in at that joint seal at the building face, that maybe the water is going through the landscape area and migrating along those utility lines to the basement. So we will be installing what's called a piezometer. These are basically like a PVC tube, a small well that gets installed into the ground that allows us to go out during rain events and measure to see if we actually have water ponding in those landscape beds, and then that might be indicative that that's a source of water getting over to the basement. The one thing I'd point out is, a lot of the modern building designs would have basically a French drain system, some type of barrier wall against the basement that groundwater or water as it rains down on the surface and migrating to the basement is not an uncommon problem, but modern buildings are kind of designed to address that. Given the age and the historic nature of a lot of the buildings down there, that surface water, can find its way through. We have old limestone foundations, mortar joints, things like that. And so we think working incrementally on that surface seal at the building face will address most of the problems, but then we'll continue monitoring the landscaped areas as well. And so that's kind of a short summary of the report findings, talk about kind of the two next steps the city has done, and then like I said, I've actually met over the past 2 days with all the property owners that have reported leaks to us. And I'd stay in for any questions you guys have.
This sounds a lot like the issues in there sound a lot like what we kind of hypothesized when you and I talked last year. So were you surprised by any of the findings in the?
I think I wouldn't say surprised, but I was glad to hear that our consultant kind of came to the same conclusions that we were thinking about, that it was a rainwater issue, and just they did help us identify what those primary pathways would be for the water.
Who's responsible for any damage that might have occurred or will occur?
So when we talk about damages, I'd say that's a legal question, and defer to our attorneys to respond to that.
maybe a little bit related to that, it sounds like from the report that a lot of this started with the remodel of South Kansas Avenue. So what going forward as we continue to do streetscape remodeling in the city, we be looking at in order to prevent this kind of thing from happening, Quincy or on another older street?
So a couple of things I would also add that we found during the report is, as we talked to property owners, some of them talked about they had experienced leaks prior to the original streetscape project in the 1980s, and that was one of the things we saw when council approved this original project by resolution, asking the question, is this going to address basement leaks on Kansas Avenue? So what I'd say is that some of these basement leaks out there, there's definitely indications that they were occurring prior to this project and prior to previous streetscape projects. What we're trying to do is address what we think are likely sources from the way that we did the project, and then I think we'll take that information in consideration for future designs as well.
If fixing the mortar joint, I noticed in the report that there was a number of options, like maybe raising the level of the sidewalk and creating kind of a grade, and there's a couple other options that are in there. Have you considered any of those other options besides just replacing the mortar? And
yeah, so I mean, I think what we're trying to do is be incremental. We feel pretty good that that's going to take care of most of the problems. What I've said to all the property owners as we've met with them, that we're here, we're listening, we have our contact information. If that's not addressing it, we're going to continue to work in trying to resolve these issues with what we can do in the right of way.
There were known storm sewer issues on Kansas before the issue happened, and then there were storm sewers that were not replaced. Do we know how we identified where the problems were? Or was that identified? Were they replaced if there was something bad, or was it just, how did that
So
work?
the replacements of the storm sewer were strategic in nature. There wasn't a wholesale replacement of the storm sewer throughout the system, but the parts where there were concerns were replaced. And then one of the things we even did prior to engaging with Terracon was we put a TV camera, basically a robotic camera, through that storm line to verify that any roof drains were still connected, that there wasn't any blockage or separation within the storm sewer that would be indicative of a leak going into the basement. And what we found through that was that the storm sewer was kind of ruled out as a source. Like I said, what we see as being the consistent thread or theme we're hearing from the property owners is it's associated from the rain events, and primarily it's coming in at that sidewalk elevation as opposed to a lower elevation with the storm line.
if the PC well in the planners proves that it is pooling there, you may have said this and I didn't catch it. What kind of remedy is involved in that?
So there's a couple of things that we could do, and it does require excavating and redoing those landscape beds, which is fairly intensive, disruptive work, and that's why we're trying to be incremental in identifying and addressing these issues. Basically creating what we call a clay cap. So you think it's that utility service line crosses, putting a relatively impervious soil barrier along that, as well as a stop at that landscape bed to prevent the water from migrating further over to the basement. But of course, that would be a more intensive, disruptive repair, and we want to confirm that's actually occurring before taking that type of step.
Is there a cost estimate to any of the options, in terms of the mortar and the PVC wells?
So we're working on that. Currently, I don't have that information available.
Okay. That's all I got.
Thank
That's
you.
fine.
Okay. Thank you.